Hey everybody. Welcome to my office here on a rainy, crappy day here in June in upstate New York. And not only is it raining, but the bands are absolute garbage today, so I can't even play radio. So I figured I'd shoot a video and talk about sort of my philosophy behind portable radio. In fact, I don't own a QRO radio. I don't own a base station radio. I don't own a power supply. Everything I run off battery power. So I have a number of different radios here in front of me that I'm going to talk about. And I'll talk about why I chose them, the things I like about them, the things I don't like about them. All right. We've got a bunch of different radios here on the table. We'll talk about, and there's also a tuner, which we'll talk about in a minute. But we'll talk about why I own the radios I own, why I choose what I choose, some of the things that I might purchase in the future, and some other possibilities that you could kind of go with. So in front of me, we'll start with these two radios right here. Let me get this guy out of the way, slide these guys down. Let's talk about these two radios right here, because as far as I'm concerned, this is the cream of the crop when it comes to portable QRP field activation radios. Some people might disagree with me, and that's fine. And you know, if you've got specific reasons, you can feel free to leave them in the comments. I know people have had problems with the TX500, specifically having issues where it decides not to transmit, and then they've got to send it out to get it serviced. And service on these is kind of tough. But that seems to be sort of isolated to some radios. I've never had an issue with mine, but I know it can be an issue. So I'm going to start out with these two particular radios because, like I said, I think these are the cream of the crop when it comes to QRP radios for field use. I don't really think you can get any better than these two radios. I will give you one other option that would be right up there with these. I don't own one, and I'll talk about why. So we'll start with the TX500. You guys have seen this in other videos before. The TX500 is one of my favorite radios that I own. This thing it does a lot of things really well. It has a fantastic receiver. It is very rugged. The build quality in this thing, other than this 3D printed stand I have it in from the QRP store, the build quality on this thing is the best you're going to find in ham radio, full stop, end of story, bar none. You're not going to find another portable rig that is as tough as this thing. This is one piece of machine billet aluminum, hard anodized. It's water resistant. This thing is an absolute tank, and it's not as heavy as you'd think it would be. When I got this radio, I was afraid it would be heavier than it is. It's really not. I mean, it's definitely heavier than some of the other radios ever on the table, but it's not the heaviest radio here on the table by any stretch. But the build quality in this radio is so far ahead of every other radio I have on the table, including this Elecraft, that it's not even funny. And we'll talk about that KX2 in a minute, because I love that radio also. Now, that's not to say this radio is perfect. There are some things about this radio that drive me crazy. First things first, I don't like having to have 5 million adapters sticking out the sides in order to run this thing. I understand why they did it, right? These GX12 sort of aviation style connectors are water resistant, and they do a very good job of that. I don't worry about taking this thing out in the field and getting it wet. I don't want to have it in a downpour, but if it sprinkles on it, I don't care. That KX2, whole different ballgame. The pan adapter on this thing is fantastic. The information you get on that screen is everything you need and nothing you don't. The menus on this thing are really well done. You can tell the people who designed this radio are hams, and they are definitely field operators. Everything you need is either on one of these buttons on the top of the screen here, or the bottom of the screen here. There are 8 buttons. There are 4. They're kind of hard to see in the video, but there are 4 across the top and 4 across the bottom. Those are sort of your quick functions. You can scroll back and forth. There's also a menu button where you can scroll through your items. The menu system is very simple on this thing. You're up and running on this radio in 5 minutes, no problem whatsoever. Everything's self-explanatory, very easy to use, very, very field-friendly. Like I said, very well built. Downsides, this particular radio is made in Russia. Now, some people may have a problem with that for political reasons. I don't. I don't have a problem with the Russian people. I might have a problem with their government, but I don't have a problem with their people. But they're currently, I believe, making these in the UAE now to try to get around that supply issue. But people may have a problem with that. These are kind of hard to get too. When you see these, they don't last very long. HRO is the only distributor here in the United States. There are a few others around the world, but HRO here in the United States is the only place you can get these new. And they are very expensive. Depending on when you buy it, it might be anywhere between $1,100 and $1,400, depending on how the supply is and whatnot. When I bought this one, I think it was $1,200, which is a little on the high side, but that's what they were going for when I bought this radio. So build quality is fantastic. The size of this thing is fantastic. It's very thin. If I take this QRP store little stand off of this thing, and this thing's great, this little 3D printed stand, it folds up tight against the radio. But I mean, this radio is very thin. It's very well built. It's very light. It has all the features I need and nothing I don't. Now, there are a few things I wish it had. I would love to have an internal battery on this. Now, they did just come out with an attachable battery pack that attaches to the back of this radio. There's your pins for the battery pack, and they hook in. If you take these rubber plugs out, there are threaded holes there that the battery pack goes into. But I don't have one for this. They just came out and they're very expensive. There are some aftermarket solutions also, but I wish it did have an internal battery. The other thing I wish this had was an internal speaker. Sometimes it's nice to not have to drag the speaker mic with you or a set of headphones and the adapter with you. Again, everything on this radio needs an adapter. But aside from that, the receive on this is amazing. Sending on this thing is great. Even though this is a relay, I'm primarily a CW operator, and even though this is a relay radio, it transmits using relays, it's not obnoxious. Some of these radios are. This one is not. So, like I said, outstanding field radio. It works great for digital, works great for CW, works great on single sideband. The sensitivity is great. The selectivity is great. The features are great. The filtering is great. The signal processing is great. This is a fantastic radio. So the other sort of cream of the crop when it comes to field radios is the venerable KX2. Now this one has a whole lot of aftermarket stuff on it, but any version of the KX2 will get the job done. This is probably the Cadillac of field radios. I'm not sure you can get much better than this. Now there are some things about this radio that I don't like, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But if I had to have just one radio, like if I could only have one radio to do everything with, it would probably be this radio. Even though it does have some shortcomings that I'm not a fan of, it does so many things so well that this would probably be the one radio I would choose. Now, Elecraft, it really doesn't need an introduction. The receivers are fantastic. The filtering's fantastic. It's got a ton of functionality. This thing will do so much stuff. The Lab 599 is a 160-6. This is 80-10. So the Lab 599 does have a little more, a few more bands to choose from, but I don't really use 160 very much, hardly ever. And at 6 meters, I can take it or leave it. This guy for CW there is no better radio as far as field work is concerned, I don't think, than one of these, or maybe a KX1 or a KX3. But I think the KX2 is a sweet spot because it is not CW only, right? This is a full feature radio. This does single sideband. This will do digital. This will do CW, obviously. It has a ton of features. The internal tuner in this thing is amazing. This does have an internal battery, so this radio does have the internal tuner. It does have the internal battery also. One thing this radio does not have yet, and I will install it, is the internal charger. So this one, I do have to remove the battery from to charge. That's not a huge deal, but I will, at some point here, install the internal charger that they just came out with. As far as receiver is concerned, this radio and the TX500 are pretty much neck and neck. They're both amazing. This radio's got more features than the TX500 does. It will do more stuff, I think. It does have the tuner, like I said, and the battery and whatnot. A couple things that I don't like about this radio. You'll see I've got the side guards on it, right? The Pro Audio Engineering heatsink and the side rails and stuff, and I do have the plastic cover that goes over the front of this. I'm going to be honest with you. Plastic knobs, crappy steel case, cheap Lexan screwed-on cover over the display, which is a fantastic display, I might add, even though it doesn't have a waterfall or a pan adapter. The pan adapter on the TX500 is amazing. The screen on this thing is very good. I don't like the plastic knobs and the cheap case this thing comes in. I mean, this is like putting a Ferrari engine in a Chevy Chevette, right? I mean, it's not that great looking, and it's, to be honest with you, the case is kind of chintzy. But the guts of this thing are top-notch, second to none, probably the best field radio you can buy, even with the build quality of the actual case being meh. The other thing I don't like about this radio is it is menu hell. Unlike the TX500, which is, in 5 minutes, you will understand how everything on this radio works. In 5 hours, you will have scratched the surface on this radio and going, wait, which knob do I push? Which way do I turn this one? How many times do I have to push that button? It gets kind of crazy. Part of that is because this radio does have so many options. But it isn't super easy to do. Now, one thing I do really like about this is you can do direct entry of frequencies on this. You can't on the TX500. You have to spin the encoder. This has got both a slow and a fast VFO, and then you can use the buttons and the knobs. There are numbers next to them, so you can see 0 next to the gain, AF gain, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 next to our key speed, so on and so forth. You can directly enter frequencies. So that's really nice on this radio. One thing I do love is that the key speed knob is right here in the front. So if I need to turn my key speed up or down as I'm working somebody, it's one knob. Now, I do have one other radio here that'll do that also, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But this is right there on the front, ready to go. So like I said, if you want Shack in a Box, the other thing this has got is this does have a built-in microphone. So if I don't bring the speaker mic with me, but I want to do single sideband, you can use the transmit button with the built-in speaker to do single sideband on this thing. So if you wanted one radio that did everything, call it a day, this is the guy. Now, the other problem with this radio, well, there's two. One is obscenely expensive. So this radio, right now they're about $1,600 new for a Shack in a Box. With the aftermarket stuff on this, you're probably looking closer to $1,800. That's a lot of money to spend for a 10-watt, 12-watt QRP radio. All right, I mean, it just is. But it packs so much stuff into such a small package. I mean, if you look at how small this radio is, so there's the TX500. I don't know if you can see how much smaller the KX2 is, but it's much smaller. Now it's much deeper also. But it is a lot smaller radio, and it is definitely lighter. Okay, so if you had to have a single field radio to do everything forever, this would probably be the radio I'd choose. Even though it does have some shortcomings, this is probably the best of the bunch. It's either this or the TX500. Those are the two radios that I would keep over all my other radios. From there, let me talk about this FX4CR. You guys have seen this in, you guys have seen this in a video or two. This is a quirky little radio. This has got some really cool things about it, and it's got some things about it that I'm not a huge fan of. Let me start with the build quality of this radio. The build quality of this radio is outstanding. The body of this radio is stout. The buttons feel great. The knobs feel great. I'll be honest with you, the external build quality of this radio is better than that Elecraft. This thing's $550. This has a color waterfall. It'll do single sideband. It will do CW. It will do digital. It will do Bluetooth digital. This is 20 watts. So the TX500, while it's advertised as 10, will actually go to 11. The KX2 will go to 12. This will do 20 watts. Now, I wouldn't want to do 20 watts digital. I mean, 20 watts single sideband, no problem. But this radio has a lot of features packed into a very small package. This is a very cool little radio. It's about $550. There are a few things that I don't like about this radio. The waterfall is not super responsive. When you tune the VFO, it takes a while for that waterfall to react. The CW on this thing is meh. It's not awful. I've definitely used worse, but it's nowhere near the level of the Elecraft or the Lab 599. And the Elecraft is pin diodes. So when you send on that Elecraft, there's no clicks. In fact, it's full break-in QSK. You can hear everything. The Lab 599 does use relays, as does this. And you'll see that when this thing transmits, the relay clicks can get a little crazy, especially the timing on the keying and whatnot. But all in all, this is kind of a cool little radio. Like I said, it'll do Bluetooth digital. It's sort of a jack of all trades, master of none. It is nowhere near the quality radio those other two are, but it does have some really cool features. It's got that color waterfall display. It's got Bluetooth digital, no tuner, no internal battery. The speaker in it's quite good. This also has an internal microphone, so you can set the RIT button up. There's a little microphone hole right there, and use that for single sideband in a pinch. So this is a cool radio for somebody who, it's very, very small. It's smaller than the KX2. It's probably 2/3 the size of the KX2. All right. I mean, it's a very small radio. Not as high quality as the other two, but the receiver's actually pretty good in this thing. And it does a really respectable job in pretty much everything. Like I said, it's not the best CW radio. The receive is good. The transit side, you get some weird popping and artifacts, but it's not horrible. I've definitely used worse. If you're looking to get into a full-featured, full-function rig for, the field, this is a pretty good solution. It's probably not the best, and I'll talk about what I think is the best entry-level radio at pretty much any price point in a minute. But this would definitely get the job done. These take about 6 weeks to get. At least mine did when I ordered it. He's got to build them. It's one guy. He ordered it from China. He ships it. They're a pretty cool little radio. Then you've got some of your more budget-minded options. So like I said, that guy's about $550. Then you've seen this in videos as well, my SW3B. So if you're looking for just a CW-only radio, this is kind of a cool little radio. It's a tri-bander. It's, 40-30-20, CW only. The encoder's a little chintzy on this, but aside from that, the build quality's okay. I mean, it's a metal case. I put the little 3D printed side rails on it. I have a little 3D printed cover to go over the top too to kind of protect the encoder and whatnot, because that's a little bit cheap. But I'll be honest with you, the audio quality on this thing for CW is very, very good. The sensitivity seems to be very good. The selectivity seems to be fairly good. If you're into CW, this thing's $188. And it gets the job done. It's 5 watts. Actually, I think it's slightly more than 5 watts maybe. But it's got an internal memory. It's only a CQ. You can't set it to do anything else. So you can set it to CQ your call sign. You can't do like CQ Poda or CQ Soda or anything like that. You'll have to manually key that. But this radio doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles or a lot of frills. It's got a very simple monochrome screen. But like I said, the audio on this thing is actually remarkably good for what it is. So if you're looking for just a CW only rig, that isn't going to break the bank, this guy works well. So does like a QCX Mini would be another good option. If you want to spend a little more money, like a Mountain Topper would be an excellent choice. The one thing you got to watch with a Mountain Topper is this will take between 8 and 15 volts. A Mountain Topper will not. They'll only take, I think, up to a maximum of 12 volts. They're really finicky when it comes to voltage, so you've got to be careful with what you run for a battery on one of those. We've seen the True SDX, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time harping on this thing. It is what it is. The audio's meh. It's a ton of features packed into a very small package, a very lightweight package with a so-so receiver and garbage audio. Does digital great. The CW decoding's great. This will get you in the door as an entry-level radio for $140. Would not be my first choice for a radio. Now, I did say that this, if you were trying to get into portable stuff on the cheap, this would probably be the cheapest way to go. It probably still is. There are some used radios you could get around that same price point, which would be better radios. But this thing works. It gets the job done. Would it be my only choice for a radio? Would this want to be the only radio I own? Absolutely not. Neither would that. The other radios I talked about, they could be your only radio. Now, the problem with this radio, and this radio is they don't have tuners, no internal batteries, anything like that. You can run an external tuner, right, like this little ZM2. But honestly, I prefer resonant antennas anyway when I'm out in the field. So I run like an NFET half wave or a resonant vertical or something like that. So I really don't worry about the tuner in these things. It is nice to have the tuner in the KX2, but you don't really need it. Now, let me talk about the radio that if somebody says, I'm just getting into ham radio and I run a radio that can do everything. I just want one rig. I don't want to break the bank, but I want to buy one radio that will do everything I need it to do. Honestly, and people are going to balk at this one, buy a G90 and call it a day. You are not going to find a radio for $450 that does what this radio does in a package like this. People will talk crap about this radio all day long because it's a cheap Chinese radio and they're garbage and it's not. This radio is fantastic for what it costs. This radio is even fantastic for, this would be, even if this was more expensive, it'd be a great radio. Color waterfall display. Yes, it's tiny, but it's very readable. It does a really good job. 20 watts, internal tuner. The internal tuner in this thing is awesome. In fact, I would say it's better than the one in the Elecraft. Tons of features, tons of options. One of the things I love on this radio is it's got this multi-function knob where I can set this to do a lot of different things. I've got this set for key speed right now, so I can adjust my key speed just by spinning that dial, right? Kind of like the Elecraft. Plenty portable. I put this little bail on it. You can get it from, I think I got it from Radioddity maybe. It doesn't come with the bail, which makes it a little bit obnoxious to use because it lays flat. But this is my radio I use here at home. Like this is my desk. shack radio. I don't really have a shack, but this is my home radio. But you can I've totally thrown this thing in a backpack and taken it out in the field. It's not that big. It's about the size of a portable radio, maybe not even quite that big. Like I said, 20 watts, internal tuner, color waterfall, lots of options. Honestly, if you're just getting into HF and you want a radio that will do portable stuff, you can use at home. You can use resident and non-resident tuners. This has got a CW decoder. This actually sending with CW on this thing's actually pretty good. It's not as good as the Elecraft or the TX500, but it's not bad. It's better than the rest of the radios. Well, it's not as good as the SW3B, but that's a CW only radio. Like I said, if you can only have, if you're talking entry level and you can only have a single radio, this would be what I would recommend. You could also do some of the discontinued Yaesu radios are good, like the, things like the 891, 991, those kind of things, whatever they were, all those radios they've discontinued. If you can find one of those, use those are good radios too, but they're a little finicky. Especially if you're into CW. But like I said, if you're looking for a radio that just does everything and it won't break the bank, just buy one of these and call it a day. Like they're like $450. You can find them even cheaper than that. You can find them used for like $300. Pick one of these things up. You can use it for POTA. You can use it at home. You can use it camping, whatever. I wouldn't want to take this thing doing a soda expedition. It is a little big and heavy for that. And it doesn't have an internal battery, right? It does have an internal tuner, but not an internal battery. But like I said, you're going to have a hard time beating this radio for that price point. Now, let's talk real quick about some other possible options. If you're looking for portable, obviously your big stuff is kind of out. I mean, you could like an IC7300 or like a Yaesu FTDX10 or a whatever, the 710 or whatever. Those are kind of big and they're 100-watt radios. You're going to need a big battery. You could use them. You could take them to a park or something, but you're not going to lug those things into the woods. This you could. When it comes to the King of the Hill, right? We talk about our Elecraft KX2. You could also go with a KX3, a little bit bigger, but it's got 166. You can put a 2-meter module in it, so you could do that. The other, when I talk about the three sort of cream of the crop QRP field radios, it's the TX500, the KX2, and then the elephant in the room that I don't have on the desk, which is the ICOM IC705. I don't have a 705. I would love to have one, but they're very expensive. These two radios are also. But it doesn't really suit my operating style. They're much bigger. They're not very rugged. No internal tuner. It's got the big delicate waterfall, the touchscreen waterfall, which is gorgeous, and it'd be great to use if I was sitting at a picnic table or in a cabin. But throwing that thing they're big, much bigger than these, much heavier than these. Throwing it in a backpack and going to the woods didn't really seem like the best idea for me. If you want to do that, have at it. If you're not the kind of operator like me who goes 5-6 miles into the woods with a radio in their pack, and you want something that's got everything, it's got 160 all the way through 70 centimeters. It's got a touchscreen waterfall, Bluetooth, digital, GPS, D-Star. It does sort of half-ass APRS, DPRS, or whatever they call it. It'll decode RTTY. It'll do all sorts of stuff. You want just a shack in a box, internal battery, ready to roll that does literally everything. The only thing it doesn't have is an internal tuner, and you're not worried about it being rugged or tiny. Go buy an IC705 and call it a day. But like I said, for me, when it comes to field use, these are the two radios I'm going to use the most. The KX2 and the TX500, just because they fit my operating style the best. So I'm sure I left a ton of radios out. I don't own, obviously, every radio known to man. I could just speak to what I've used. But those are my personal observations on these radios. Like I said, these would be my sort of cream of the crop. But like I said, if you're talking entry level and you want something that'll do everything you need it to do on a budget, you're really going to have a hard time beating the G90. You could do like a 6100 also, but the 6100 is a little finicky. The 6100 is a shack in the box, though. That's got an internal battery. That's got all that stuff. But I still think I would probably go with a G90 just because it's cheaper. It's a little more, even though it's an older radio, it's a little more refined. The 6100 can be a little finicky. And I honestly think the receiver and everything's better in this radio than is the 6100 from what I've seen. So at any rate, folks, that's sort of my take on field portable radios and what I would buy and what I did buy and why I bought them, right? If I had to buy if I could only have one radio, it'd either be this TX500 or honestly, it'd probably be that that KX2. If you want something that is full featured, will do everything for you. You want to take it out in the field and it's tiny, this thing's pretty cool. Like I said, and it's not expensive, $550. Like I said, if you want run radio that won't break the bank, that'll do everything, go buy a G90, call it a day. You can buy these things used all day long for $300-400, not even $400. And then down the road, if you decide you want a nicer radio, you can buy a nicer radio. And people are like, I sold my G90 once I got a better radio. I don't. I keep this. Like I said, this is my radio I use here at home. Like I said, you may want to invest in a separate tuner if you use some of the other radios, or just use resonant antennas. So at any rate, folks, I hope that at least gave you a little bit of insight as to why I choose what I choose, right? And why I like what I like and why I don't like what I don't like. Like I said, there's no perfect radio. If you could take these two radios and put them in a blender and they had a baby, that would be the perfect radio. You give me a radio with build quality like this, with the feature set and receiver of this radio, this one's not far behind. But you give me pin diode switching, transmitting like this, the receiver in these are pretty comparable, but you give me internal battery, internal tuner, build quality, and pan adapter out of this radio, I would never need another radio again. So all right, folks, this one's running a little long and I don't want to bore you to death, so I think we'll call it a day there. I really appreciate you watching. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments section below. I try to answer everybody as long as it's not an idiotic question or comment. But like I said, I hope you found it informative. I hope it gave you a little bit of food for thought. And with that being said, I will see you on the next one. Thank you for watching, and 7-3.